I used to think that the most dangerous people look dangerous. You know, the kind of people that immediately set off alarms in your head. But the older I get, the more I realize that real danger usually looks normal at first. Sometimes it even looks friendly. That's what makes certain experiences stick with you forever. The feeling that, if one or two small things had gone differently, you might not have made it out alive. This happened about 2 winters ago. At the time, I was working remotely for a software company, and because my job was online, I could pretty much work from anywhere as long as I had internet. My friend Trevor had the same setup, and one day, he pitched the idea of renting a cabin in the mountains for a week, so we could work during the day and relax at night. It sounded perfect. Trevor and I had been friends since high school. We weren't extremely close anymore, but we still talked regularly and gamed together online all the time. He was one of those people who got along with everybody, loud, funny, outgoing. Basically the opposite of me. The only thing that made me hesitate was when Trevor told me his cousin Mason would also be staying with us, that I had met Mason once before, at a family barbecue years earlier, and I barely remembered him. The only thing I really recalled was that he seemed quiet and awkward. Trevor assured me it would be fine. He mostly keeps to himself, he told me. You'll barely even notice he's there. A week later, we packed Trevor's SUV and drove up into the mountains. The cabin was deep in a heavily wooded area, about 30 minutes from the nearest town. The road leading there was narrow and covered in ice. At several points I remember thinking that, if another car came around the bend too fast, we'd probably end up sliding off the mountain. The cabin itself looked nice enough. It was 2 stories with a wraparound porch and huge windows facing the woods. Snow covered the roof and tree branches around the property. It looked peaceful in the kind of way that only isolated places can. When we got there, Mason was already waiting for us. Apparently he'd driven separately earlier that morning. He stood outside when we pulled up, wearing a dark winter coat with his hands shoved into his pockets. He gave us a small wave, but didn't smile. As soon as we got out of the SUV, Trevor immediately started joking around and talking about how great the week was going to be. Mason barely said anything. I tried not to judge him too quickly, because I know some people are just socially awkward. Still, there was something strange about him that I couldn't place. Maybe it was the eye contact, or the lack of it. Whenever you spoke to him, he'd either stare directly into your eyes for way too long or avoid looking at you completely. Inside, the cabin was warm and surprisingly modern. The owner had decorated the place with old hunting gear and antique furniture that made the whole place feel rustic and cozy. The first 2 days were normal. During the day we worked remotely from the dining room table while snow fell outside. At night we cooked dinner, drank whiskey, watched movies, and played cards. Mason mostly stayed quiet, but every once in a while he'd randomly say something unsettling, not threatening, just weird. For example, on the second night Trevor started telling some story about a teacher we hated in high school, and out of nowhere Mason quietly asked us if we'd ever seen a dead body before. The question came so suddenly that Trevor laughed, thinking he was joking, but Mason wasn't laughing. He just stared at us waiting for an answer. Trevor awkwardly said no. Then Mason nodded slowly and said, "It changes the way you look at people afterward." There was this uncomfortable silence after he said that. Eventually Trevor changed the subject, but I noticed he looked uneasy. Later that same night, I woke up around 3 in the morning because I thought I heard footsteps outside my bedroom. At first I assumed it was Trevor using the bathroom or getting water. But the footsteps kept going, slow pacing, back and forth across the hallway. I opened my bedroom door slightly and looked out. Mason was standing at the end of the hallway, perfectly still. He was facing the window overlooking the woods. I remember whispering his name, because he scared the hell out of me. He turned slowly toward me. The expression on his face looked distant somehow, almost confused, like he forgot where he was. I asked him if he was okay. He stared at me for another few seconds before quietly saying, "Did you hear that?" I listened carefully. Nothing. I told him I didn't hear anything. He looked back toward the dark woods outside the window. Then he whispered, "Something keeps walking around the cabin." I didn't know what to say to that. Eventually he just walked back into his room and shut the door. I locked mine after that. The next morning Mason acted completely normal again. Trevor joked that his cousin probably watched too many horror movies growing up. I tried laughing along, but something about the previous night bothered me more than I wanted to admit. That afternoon, the weather got worse. Heavy snow started falling, and by evening the internet went out completely. Trevor was annoyed because he still had work deadlines, but eventually we accepted there was nothing we could do about it. The power flickered several times throughout dinner. Each time the lights dimmed, I noticed Mason looking toward the windows nervously. At one point Trevor finally asked him what his deal was. Mason hesitated before answering. Then he quietly said, "I don't think we're alone out here." Trevor laughed immediately, but I didn't, because deep down, I'd started feeling it too. That sensation that somebody was nearby watching us. You know how sometimes a place just starts to feel wrong? That's how the cabin felt by the third night. Wrong. After dinner, Trevor suggested we play poker to kill time. Since the internet was still down. We sat around the table drinking and playing cards, while snow slammed against the windows outside. For a while things actually felt normal again. Then Trevor noticed something strange. There were footprints outside. Fresh ones, right outside the dining room window. All three of us stood up immediately. The footprints came from the woods and stopped directly beneath the window where we'd been sitting. Trevor grabbed a flashlight and opened the front door. The freezing wind hit us instantly. He shined the flashlight around the property, while Mason and I stood behind him. Nothing. No movement. No person. Just darkness and snow. Trevor, eventually convinced himself somebody had wandered onto the property accidentally. Mason disagreed. He kept staring into the woods with this terrified expression I hadn't seen before. Then quietly he said, "They were standing there watching us." Trevor finally snapped a little after that. He told Mason he needed to stop acting creepy because he was freaking everybody out. Mason didn't argue. He just walked back inside silently. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The wind outside was so loud it sounded like someone scratching against the walls of the cabin. Around 2 in the morning I heard a noise downstairs. A loud thud. Then another. At first, I thought maybe Trevor fell or dropped something. I got out of bed and stepped into the hallway. Trevor's bedroom door was open. His room was empty. Mason's door was open to empty. That immediate rush of panic hit me. I headed downstairs carefully. The living room lights were off, but faint moonlight reflected off the snow outside, giving the room this dim blue glow. That's when I saw Trevor. He was standing near the back door staring outside. I asked him what was going on. Without turning around he whispered, "Someone's out there." I walked closer. At first, I couldn't see anything through the darkness and snowfall. Then movement. A figure standing near the tree line, completely motionless. Just watching the cabin. I felt my stomach drop instantly. Trevor shouted, asking who was out there. The figure didn't move, didn't respond. Then suddenly it stepped backward into the woods and disappeared. Trevor grabbed the fireplace poker and said we should go check. I told him absolutely not. That turned into an argument almost immediately because Trevor thought I was overreacting. Mason suddenly appeared at the top of the stairs during all of this. He looked terrified. Then he said something that made everything worse. There were 2 of them earlier. Trevor stared at him. "What do you mean 2? Mason looked toward the windows. "I saw them yesterday." At that point Trevor completely lost patience. He started accusing Mason of trying to scare us on purpose. Mason denied it repeatedly, but Trevor wasn't listening anymore. Eventually Trevor stormed upstairs angry, while Mason sat silently on the couch staring at the floor. I remember asking him directly if he was messing with us. He looked genuinely hurt by the question. Then quietly he said, "You think I joke about this?" I didn't answer, because honestly, I didn't know what to think anymore. The next morning Trevor apologized for yelling at him. Things felt awkward after that, but until we found the back door open. All of us swore had been locked the night before. Snow had drifted slightly into the kitchen from outside, and there were wet footprints on the floor. Footprints that led halfway through the kitchen before disappearing. Trevor finally looked genuinely shaken after that. We searched the entire cabin together. Nothing was missing. Nobody was hiding anywhere. Still, the mood changed completely after that discovery. Trevor suggested we leave early. None of us argued. The problem was the storm had become severe overnight. Road conditions were awful. Trevor decided we'd leave first thing the next morning once visibility improved. That evening none of us drank. None of us relaxed. We mostly sat quietly in the living room, listening to the storm. At one point the power finally went out completely. The cabin became pitch black except for the fire.